Chodesh Tov, everybody.
Kodesh Tov, Kavod Rav, how are you?
Thank you.
Kodesh Tov, you're going to give us the skinny on what we are and aren't allowed to do this week?
Well, one thing I can tell you, I'm not giving you a chart. But besides that, I can give you anything you like. Yeah, so we're, after Rosh Chodesh, we don't eat meat, right? So that's not really for you. But we don't eat meat. And what else we got?
Laundry?
Yeah, laundry's okay until next week.
Okay. Can we wear clean clothes next week or just we can't
I'm
can't
sorry?
launder? We can't launder next week or we can't wear clean clothes?
Yeah, just Sunday and Monday, you have a prohibition. That's it. For laundry. Yeah, both. But it doesn't apply to underwear and towels and things like this, right? That stuff is no problem. Meaning to say that you can wear it clean.
How about showering?
Yeah, so this week everything's normal, but next week the custom is, to take like a cold shower, whatever. If you can tolerate that. But if it's hard for you to tolerate that, there are some rabbis who say, that since you're just doing it to remove the filth off your body, so it's okay. It's not really for pleasure. So it's not really a problem, either way. Only bathing for pleasure was forbidden. So the truth is that either you follow the custom or you just do the halacha, which is really, that you can bathe except for pleasure. So that's about it. Of course, on Tisha B'Av, it's all forbidden, whatever. But yeah.
How about traveling?
The truth is that even on Tisha B'Av itself, if a person is dirty, he's allowed to wash off the dirt. Not really a problem. So yeah, there are some more things also. I just can't recall right now. But if you look at my videos and stuff, you'll see all the. I post videos every day about those things. You'll see the whole gamut there. No weddings. Don't get married this week. Okay.
I'd rather eat meat.
I'm sorry.
Said I would rather eat meat.
Oh boy. Okay. All right. Kinds of things. Okay. So we'll get started here. I think we're getting close to the end of this. Took us quite a while, but we did it. It looks like we're on bed here. Okay, it looks familiar. It's like a continuation of our topic before, which is talking about somebody who passes away. So it says here, Katuv Od Sham, right? It's written there furthermore. Uh, where is that? That's the question. Where is that written? Or Chod Chaim, perhaps. Okay, whatever. Anyway, it says there, V'shamanu ala Rabad. So it says, we heard about the Rabad. Shetziva le'alin bo met b'yom tov rishon ad yom tov sheni. Right. So he holds that, practically speaking, right, he told people not to bury the dead on the first day of Yom Tov, to wait till second day. Israel. So why is that? So the Jews should bury him, But his friends, right, didn't agree with him. The Lab Shapir Avi, the Enanu Leashot Met Yom Tov Sheni. So it says not proper to do that, right? To delay the burial until the second day. Whoever knows a little bit about these things, understands what that means, because they say that until the dead is buried, they suffer tremendously, like being unburied, because the burial is like a kapara for them, it's like atonement. So just you got to get them into the ground, just as soon as possible. You don't want to leave them above ground too much, right? Unless it's necessary. Well, if it's not necessary, you should not. So that's the reason why they didn't agree with him. Unfortunately today, this is very common. They delay it, for a day or two. Why is that? Well, all the relatives are not here yet. They have to come in from Paris, and right, and this one is coming from Argentina, right? Okay, it's very nice, very good, but this poor dead person, suffering, not being buried in the ground. You know what I'm saying? So some idiot can come, from Paris. You know what I mean? What the it's a little bit of awkward thinking, sometimes these things. Uh, but the problem is, as I told you guys last week, the problem is that when you're holding a funeral these days, people are driving in, and so what's going to be if you hold a funeral on Yom Tov, everybody's going to drive in, So if you have people who are not religious, they're going to break the holiday, and that's not really good. So then, it could be that it's justified for that purpose. I can't tell you, it has to be judged, on a case by case basis. What's the best thing to do? But as a general rule, you want to get them in there, as fast as possible. You know what I mean? Get it over with. Okay, yeah, one of those things. So anyway, the mutab the kavro be'emet the asul le'alino what can I? So yeah, that's what he says, right? Better to bury him. It's better that he should be buried by goyim than he should be above ground, for 24 hours. Okay. כתב הרמב"ן בספר תורת האדם, so says the Ramban, כתב בעל הלכות, right, he brings the Bahag, עבדים בישראל אסור להון למקבר מיתה ביום טוב, right, so he says that Jewish slaves are not allowed to bury the dead on Yom Tov, right, so forget about that option, right? Okay. Okay. The Amar Rava itasku bo amamin, right? Because Rava said, right, that the goyim should do it, right? Not slaves, right? It's not the same thing. You know what the difference is, right, between a goy and a slave? The goy is already partially Jewish, so yeah, it's more stringent. He already went to the mikveh, he did like a semi-quasi conversion there. So therefore, it's more stringent for the slave. Okay. So then he goes on. אבל עבדים לעניין המלאכה בשבת ויום טוב התקשו למראיו בקברי מחינן, right? So he says, right, even if they want to do it, the slaves, we object, tell them, no, sir, do not bury the dead, right? Okay. That's what he says, the Ramman. Okay, good. In the name of the Bahag. Okay. הוציא זה ממה שאמרו בפרק החולץ, right? So where did he get this from? Where's the source? So he says it's from the Yevamot in the Gemara there, מ"ח עמוד ב', וינפש בין המתכה, right? בעבד הרי לכתוב מדבר, אלא מי הוא לא כל מלאכה אסורה להם, אלא לצורך ישראל בלבד. So he says not every labor is forbidden for them, only if it's for the sake of the Jews. נתמר בפרק 4 מחוסר כפרה, because it says, right, it's פרק in ח' עמוד א', עבד ואמה התושבים עושים מלאכה בשבת לעצמם כישראל בחול, כך קבורת המת הזה לצורך ישראל הוא ואסור על ידם. So that's interesting, right? He's talking here about not your average garden variety, slave that we are accustomed to talk about in the Torah. So there's different varieties of slaves, okay? So what's the difference? As we said, right, you have the variety which is the standard variety, right? That he's already quasi-converted, into Judaism. He went to the mikveh, he was circumcised, blah, blah, blah. Right, so there, he's already obligated to keep Shabbat. But there's also another type of slave, which is not really converted at all, right? Just a goy slave, basically, right? He's a slave, but he's a goy. So that kind of slave is what he's talking about here. So he says, right, that kind of slave, that category is different. What does that mean? They can't do labor for our sake, but they can do labor for their own sake. Interesting. ואסור לאדם כדברי בעל האחות, it says over there, אלא שאני אומר, עבד ערל גוי עובד בעבודת זרה, שאינו תושב, אינו בכלל איסור שלא הזכירה התורה, אלא תושבים שהרי קיבלם עליהם בשבע מצוות, ויזכירם התורה על השבתתן שבת, לצורך ישראל. אבל אלו גויים ערלים אינם בכלל בכל המקום, לא נתברר לי מניין לבעל האחות שיהיה יום טוב כבשבת לעניין איסור מלאכה ועבדים. So he says, right, that again, right, he's now quantifying all these kinds of types of slaves, that we have. Right? So now it seems like he's talking about three types. And we just said there's two. Now he brings in another category, right? Okay, so what are the three categories again, right? One is that he already did like a semi-conversion. That's that's the standard thing. Then you have somebody who didn't do a conversion, but he accepted the 7 mitzvot, right, of Bnei Noach. So that one is in a different plateau, right? He's not Jewish yet. He doesn't need to keep Shabbat. Then there's another one, he says, right, that hasn't accepted anything at all. He's just basically, like a totally total goy, he's a Christian basically, right? So he didn't even accept the 7 mitzvot. So whatever, right? Today it's not so relevant, so we're not going to get into this whole thing, right? But just interesting to know, right, that there's different varieties of slaves. Okay. Right. Now they're talking about giving them reparations, so we're living in a different generation now. It's not what it used to be. Okay. So that's the story there. Right, so it also, it says Shabbat and Yom Tov is not the same thing, blah 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 blah, right? All kinds of things. Okay, good, okay, very nice. עד כאן, וכבר כתבתי בסימן ש"ד, ששפת הפסקית בעניין מלאכת עבד ערל של ישראל. So this is I already wrote about this, to inform you about the various types of slavery and what they can do and not to, right? All kinds of things. We don't need these things, so we'll skip it, right? We'll skip on that one. We'll talk about reparations. Maybe there should be a chapter on that. Okay, so let's go to Shulchan Aruch and see what it says there. Okay. So it says over here like this, right? Met b'Yom Tov Rishon. If he died on the first day of Yom Tov, asur le'alino ad Yom Tov Sheni. You're not allowed to leave him over, he says, overnight until second day. Today, shitasku bo Yisrael. Even in order that it should be buried by Jews. Don't be, right, regarding this, the Shlomo Melech, he said, Al tiyeh tzaddik arveh, right? Don't be overly righteous, That's what he's telling you over here. Don't be too much of a tzaddik. Oh, it has to be buried by Jews, We don't want the goyim touching him. This kind of stuff, right? But Shulchan Aruch paskins, right, that it shouldn't be like that. They should bury him, Nobody does this today, although, right? We have to say, right? Nobody does burial on Yom Tov today. Forget about it. It just won't happen. I mean, so it's already like it's a bygone, Right? We don't have it today. But if he happens to be one of these, like, right, old timers, primitive person, kind of, that wants to bury his own dead, right, whatever, not very recommended to do that, by the way, for several reasons. But anyway, right, if that's the case, so then, we can bring a goy, to bury his dead, whatever. And technically speaking, in theory, practice, nobody does this anymore. If you call the Chevra Kadisha, right, on Yom Tov, you'll get like a message, we are closed. Right? Please call us back tomorrow, right after the Yom Tov is over. Oh, thank you. Okay, that's how you're gonna get, right? You're not gonna get a goy, answering you. Yeah, we're here to bury your dead, on Yom Tov. Yes, please come over anytime you. It's not gonna work like that. Okay. Let's go to Gimel. Okay. So yeah, bring some more stuff about this, right? A little bit more detail about this issue. And so he says, Ketav Aran b'perek Kama de Betzah, right? It says the Ran over there in Betzah. Met b'yom tov rishon davka hu deitasku ba'amamin. So he says that's only regarding the first day of Yom Tov. Then we said the goyim can bury him, right? Okay. But b'Shabbat b'yom tov and Kippurim lo. But it says when it comes to Shabbat and Yom Kippur, we don't only allow even that, right? Forget about it. The rabbis did not waive that prohibition, right, on Shabbat and Yom Kippur. They're just on Yom Tov they waived it. The Amina Perek Kama de Rosh Hashanah, because we say in the first Perek of Rosh Hashanah, Kaf al Muhammad Aleph, Efshar de Amamin Komar, could be done by Goyim, as we said, right? Komar, but Shabbat Yom Kippurim, lo. When it comes to Shabbat Yom Kippur, no. Kakatav Ramban, that's what's in the Ramban. The Sefer Torah Adam, also over there. The Lord Mibaya, Chafirat Kabar, the Koch, the Itbehu, Melachot Gemurot, the Asur Bemin, B'Shabbat, Ela, Afilu, Otzat, the Bet Kbarot, Lanichot Bechoch, so Ramban says, right, something novel here, right? Kichidush. He says not only we don't allow the goyim to dig the grave, on Shabbat and Yom Kippur, but even if it's already dug, he says, right, we don't allow even to carry the dead and to put it in there. Even that much we don't allow. So you see, right, that the rabbis did not allow this in any way, shape, or form. Right, on Shabbat and Yom Kippur, forget about it. Nothing to talk about. Okay, good. So it's even though, by way of a goy, right, it should be allowed, right, technically speaking, right, to just carry the dead and put it inside. But the rabbis didn't even allow that. So give a reason for that. Why is that? Because of the honor of the dead. What does that mean? שלא יאמרו נתחלל עליו שבת ממיתתו. Oh, look what he says, right? The reason why the rabbis didn't want the right people to be buried on Shabbat, even by goyim, is because people shouldn't say, right? Because of this person, right? They broke the Sabbath. You know? So he gets like, a bad name, whatever, right? Interesting. וכאן כתב הריבש בתשובה, זה עושה ריבש, וכתב עוד, הדבר ברור, שלעולם לעשות ביום טוב ראשון על ידי ישראל, אי אפשר אפילו יום טוב הסמוך לשבת, כי להאמין על פרק תולין. Right, so he says that, also another thing he mentions here, the Rivash, that even to do it on the first day of Yom Tov, by way of Jews, right? Not possible. Even if it's right next to Shabbat, as we said over there in Shabbat, Kuf Lametet Amud Aleph, ובפרק כמה דראש השנה, also first פרק ראש השנה, ומה שאמרת שמת ביום טוב ראשון, שחל להיות בערב שבת, and that what you said, right, that if Yom Tov falls on ערב שבת, right, ואי אפשר במאמין, it's not possible to do by way of going, כגון שאין מקום בית הקברות להמתין עד יום ראשון, לא ירצו הגויים להוליכו לפי שהוא יום ידם. So it says, they won't want to bury him on Sunday. Why? Because, they rest on Sunday, right? These goyim, these Christians, right? So, Sunday's closed, right? The business is closed on Sunday. Right? So nevertheless, right, they won't agree to do it on Sunday. Right? But nevertheless, we can't allow you to do it on the first day of Yom Tov, right? By way of Jews. So you're gonna have to wait till Monday, right? Which is already like 3 days. So therefore, he says, so the body's gonna rot. Right? תמר עצמך דוד מלך ישראל מוטל בחמה בשבת ולא התירו לטלטלו רק על ידי כיכר או תינוק. So he says, even King David, right? The story goes, right? Where the story would be brought down? On Shabbat Lamed Amud Bet, right? It says over there that when King David died, so it's known, right, that he died on, Shabbat, right? It was Shavuot and Shabbat. So what happened was, right, that his body was like, in the sun, like getting baked in the sun, which is really bad for a dead body, right? But nevertheless, right, they only allowed to move the body because it's muktzeh by way of a loaf of bread or a child, that's the way they do it. But otherwise, they wouldn't even allow to do that. So he says, therefore, there's no leniency there, right, for this. Right, unless they want to bury him, there in his house, right? In other words, in his backyard, right, by way of going. Right? If they want to do that, they can do that. He says. And then they can move him, to the the permanent grave after that. Good luck with that one. Right? Oh, sadin beyom tov. He says also you can do. He says make some kind of a blanket for him, right? By way of goyim, ve'aron and a coffin. They should put him inside there. And then you could seal it up, right? Right, with some kind of sealant there, right? Tar. They shouldn't smell should be coming out of there. And then they should bury him on right after Shabbat. So unpleasant stuff to talk about, but that's the way it is. What can we do? Not everything is rosy and peachy, right? In this world, what can we do? Okay, so that's Gimel. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch, right, and see what's going on there. So it says Shulchan Aruch like this: Shabbat uv'yom Kippurim. So it says on Shabbat and Yom Kippur, lo yitasku bo kelal, right? They cannot bury him in any fashion, right? Any manner. Afilu al yedei amamin, even by way of goyim, right? Whatever. אפילו להוציאו על ידי ולהניחו בכוך, right? Even just to carry his body, you know, and just lower him into the grave, even that's not allowed. Right? Even if the grave was dug the day before, still not allowed. So there's no solution on Shabbat Yom Kippur, right? Forget about it. Okay, good. So let's go to Daled. Okay, so let's read the Torah here, and then we'll go on. Let me just see how far this goes. Okay, it's long now. There's also another piece, right? Yeah, so we'll try to finish just today. Why not? We'll try. Okay, so what does the Torah say here? Yom Tov Sheni התעסקו בו ישראל אפילו ימים טוב שני של ראש השנה, right? So as we said, that when it comes to the second day of Yom Tov, the Jews can bury him, right? Even if it's Rosh Hashanah. אפילו לא ישתהה, אפילו למיגז לעשה ולעשות לו תכריכים, right? So you're allowed to do all the things for burial, right? Shrouds, right? All this, right? Making the coffin, blah, blah, blah. Where is this coming from? It says Bet Yosef from first parak of Betzah. Katav Ran, right? It says Ran over there. Mistaba Keban de Kachol Shavuyu or Rabbanan. So he says, since the rabbis made this like a weekday when it comes to burial, even if it's possible to do by way of goyim, he says, the Jews should do it, he says. Interesting. So the Ramban also agrees with this. So he says, not like this rabbi, right, who was the Sheltot, right, the famous book, Sheltot. It says that only if there's no goyim, right, then you can do by way of Jews. But it says if there are goyim, like lo sharina ela b'mamin, so the goyim should do it, he says. We don't allow by way of Jews, right? So he doesn't want to paskin like that, right? He wants to paskin like the other opinion, which allows this. Okay, interesting. Okay, it goes on. Stop, hold on. It says around furthermore. למגד לגלימה, למגד לחתוך כמו גודו אילנה, right? So, גלימה לתכריך. So what about making shrouds for him, right? למגד לעשה, לגזוז, or to make a coffin, right? Adas mina mechubar. And also, right, he says, regarding, right, cutting down some myrtle, right, branches, so it can have some nice smell there, right, like they do for the dead. So what they used to do is they would put the myrtle branches on the top of the coffin, right? Lichvod, right, for honor. Oh, okay. Katav Rashi b'Masechet Mad Katan. Right, so it says, right, Rashi there. So he says, yes, these things we do allow because it's not a lot of, not a lot of exertion going on there with these things. Right? But it says regarding, digging the grave itself, he says that we don't allow because it's a lot of work, Digging is a lot of work. Right? But he says, I don't agree with that. So he says the truth is that everything is allowed, right? Even digging the grave. All the more so, he says, when it comes to digging the grave, which is like a very central thing, right? To the burial, right? It's crucial. Without that, you don't have anything. The lo אפשר בלא בכי. וכך כתב ראש, it says in the ראש also, ואפילו למגד לגלימה, למגז לעשה, וכל שכן לחפור קבר. He also says, right, that you're allowed to dig a grave, ולעשות לו ארון, right, also make the coffin, as we said, right? If you can do all that on Yom Tov Sheni, it's like a total weekday, for burial. But as I said, right, nowadays they won't even do this. Nobody's going to do it for you. If you try to get a burial on the second day of Yom Tov, you're going to get the right, as I said, the message on the call waiting. Nobody's going to answer you. Forget about it, right? So you're going to have to wait till the Yom Tov is over, right? What can we do? The only thing they'll do for you, they'll come and take the body, right, and put him in the morgue. That's about it, right? Besides that, they're not going to do much. You're going to put him into the refrigerator, right? That's about it. Okay. So it goes on. But it says he tries to reconcile the words of Rashi, right? That you shouldn't be arguing with this. So in other words, they're trying to say, right, that maybe even Rashi agrees to this, right? There's a different way of understanding it. Okay, good luck, right? What can we tell you, right? That's right. It says in Hakodeshi, Betza, Sheitir Riva Letamidav, right? The Riva also allowed for his disciples, Afilu Lachefira, right? Even to dig the grave. Bechil Beatzmo Lachafor. He says, not only that, but he himself, right, went and he started to dig the grave, in order to show them, right, that it's allowed. Right? When something is allowed, right, who does it first? The rabbi does it first, right, to show everybody. Oh, there you go, right? Even I did it, If I can do it, for sure, you can do it, right? I'm the rabbi, V'chen nahagu ha'olam. So that's the custom, he says, like that. Okay. So he goes on, but that's only if they want to bury him that day. But if they don't want to bury him on that day, right, the second day of Yom Tov, then he shouldn't do nothing, right? What's the point? Either you go all the way, right, or you do nothing, right? You don't do halfway. He says, even by way of going, you shouldn't do. But he says, the only thing which is allowed is to carry the body, that's about it. That's what it says in the Rosh. שלמד מדברי רש"י, right? Learns from Rashi. כתוב בתרומת הדשן, says in this rabbi, תרומת הדשן, דמדלא מעסיק רק ביטול ההוצאה אסורה, since they, right, it says they're only allowed to carry the body, you see from there that carrying it in the public domain is not allowed. אפילו לכרמלית, right? Even to a semi-public domain, right? Not a real public domain. נמי מלאכה דרבנן נקראת, right? That's also rabbinically forbidden. ואף אגב דמשמע דלכבסו למת וגזסרו, נמי. So it says also, even though it's implied that to wash the body, right, the corpse, and to cut the hair, trim the hair, it's allowed, right? But it says when it comes to carrying, right, outside, it's more like a labor, because he's not so it says because trimming the hair of a dead is not really labor at all. It says interesting, right? So trimming the hair, giving a corpse a haircut is not really a labor, he says. Wow. Okay, there you go. Learn something new. Okay. So who says this, right? Which genius said this one? This was the Trumat Edition, right? He's a real genius, this guy. There you go. Okay, good. So, okay, let's go on. So, בנראה שהכיפה שבונים על הקבר שאין לבנותה ביום טוב. Look what he says, right? But he says one thing you shouldn't do on Yom Tov is to make like a canopy over the grave, right? To build a canopy there, right? That's already going too far. It's like icing on the cake, you know? We don't allow that. משמע בדבריו שבכיפת בניין דווקא כמה. So it says, implies from his words, he's talking about like real building there, you know? Then לבנותה ביום טוב. So you shouldn't build it on Yom Tov, right? Like a permanent structure, you know? Whatever, right? אבל כיפה של עפר, שצוברים עפר על הקבר, but he says just to, you know, pile up some, right, some dirt there, you know, on top of the grave, you know? Like they do. The custom is like that. עד שנעשה כמו תל, like it becomes like a little mound there, right? So that we can do in Yom Tov, he says. Why? Let's take the completion of the burial. Wow. Who's that? So it says, but the Mari Avuhav katav, the Mechevan she'amar tov lema'et, that since he said, right, that it's better to reduce whatever, you know, to diminish Besuda, right, things which are prohibited from the Torah. He says, even that you should be careful not to do. Right? So it says, right, Maran, he doesn't agree with that. So there you go, right? So Maran does, right, the Bit Yosef does allow to make like a little mound, right, on top of the grave. That he allows. Okay. Good. So then he goes on in the tour. ורבנו תם היה מחמיר בדבר שלא לעשות הידנה כלל על ידי ישראל. Wow. So he says, Rabbeinu Tam was stringent not to do the burial by way of Jews. Interesting. Wow. So it says regarding that Bet Yosef, Svarat Rabbeinu Tam Ketvat Tosfot, right? It's brought down Tosfot, this opinion. The Arosh and also the Rosh, Kama de Bitzah, first Perk of Bitzah. Ada Ita Tatam, regarding what it says there, Amar Rabina, says Rabina in the Talmud. And nowadays it says Dika Chavre, since we have like now the Chebra Kadisha, right? Chashinan, it says we're concerned. Uperesh Rashi, what does that mean? The Chavre Hayu Kofin at Israel Lasot Melachtan B'Yom Tov. Interesting, right? So he's talking here about a group of people, like, you know, they are like these people are like very, you know, thugs, whatever, right? Something like that. And they forced the Jews to do, right, labor on Yom Tov. So they would therefore, right, try to, you know, get out of it, right, by saying it's Yom Tov. So if they would see, right, them burying the dead, they would force them to do other labors. Wow, look at this. Incredible. In those times, you know, there was coercion like this, you know, they were coercing them. So the Rosh says like this, right? In our times, so it says we shouldn't forbid because of this. Because we don't have those thugs now, you know, these thugs, right, that force you to do stuff. Okay, well, what can I tell you? Thank God we don't have that. So he says also, it's like resembles, he says that we're not concerned about, you know, leaving like drinks uncovered, right? In the old days, they used to be careful about that. You know why? You know, they used to be careful about that, not to leave drinks uncovered. Anybody know why that is?
It's not roofies, huh?
I'm sorry?
It's not because of poisoning, huh?
Poisoning. Well, yeah, I mean, you know, they were afraid, right, that a snake would come and drink from it. So he would leave some venom in there, you know? And then a person comes and drinks it, right? Then he's finished, you know, right? He's gone. So right, but nowadays we're not concerned about that, right? Why is that? Anybody know why? So it says, right, that now, you know, amongst us, there's not really a lot of snakes amongst us. You know, they don't live amongst us. In the old days, like they used to live amongst the people, you know, the snakes. So it was like a regular thing, you know, like a snake would like kind of like crawl into your house, you know, once in a while, give you a visit, you know, like, hi, how you doing? You know, I'm your neighbor, you know, how are you feeling? Nowadays, you know, it's not very common that you have a snake in the house, you know what I mean? So therefore, unless you live in Australia, in the outback over there, right? Whatever it's called, right? That's something else. But in general, right? We don't have snakes in our houses. Okay, that's why we're not really so careful with it today. Okay. Anyway, right? לפי שאינם נחשים מצויים, right? I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm sorry. So you said the snakes would leave the poison in the water and the liquid?
Right. When a venomous snake drinks, some of the venom comes out and it stays in the water. That's what happens.
Okay. Thank you.
Did you know that?
No.
Okay, you're gonna have to Google that. You have to Google it.
I know that back then this was common, and
Okay.
was,
Right. That's the thing, because it's like the poison that they have in their throat, right? In their mouth, whatever, right? It's like a part of the system, so it gets like mixed up, it drips out.
Oh.
So when they drink, some of it just, it's like when a person drinks something, some of the saliva, can stay there, right? Well, same thing, you know what I mean? It's similar to that.
Thank you, Kavata.
God bless. Okay, so yeah. Not very pleasant stuff, but what can we do, right? It's all Torah. Okay, so right. Anyway, let's go on. So he says, right, this kind of thing is not really something which is what? What is he saying here? 1 second. Okay, so the point is, right, that nowadays we're not concerned about these things, so therefore we can just do the normal way thing, right? What does that mean, the normal way? So, the Jews can bury him on the second day of Yom Tov. That's pretty much what it said. We don't have those, right, thugs anymore, who force us to do labor on Yom Tov. Okay, so let's go on. But he says, but nevertheless, right? Right? Rif didn't write this also. So in other words, he wasn't concerned about this at all, as we said, like the Rosh said. But Rabbeinu Tam says we're stringent about this. In other words, in his time, maybe, right? Perhaps in his place, they still had these problems going on, so he was stringent about that. Also Rabbeinu Chanel, right? Pasuk like Rabina. ומעשה עירה בצרפת ועשו כל צורכי המת ורחבו עמו עד שהביאו לעיר אחרת, קברו שמה וכעס עליהם רבנו תם. Look what he says, incredible, right? He brings a story, a real story, right? What happened was that at one time in France, right? So, this guy died, right? Whatever. And what they did was, right, it must have been, second day of Yom Tov. So they took him to a different town and they buried him over there, So guess who found out, right? Guess. Rabbeinu Tam was there, right? He found out. So he was angry at them. He said, how did you do that? Don't you know I don't allow that? Right? So he gave him the third degree. Okay. All right, there you go. Right? Mishum De'aminan, the Pek Tolin, right? We said in the Pek Tolin, the Shalach Le'or Levne בשכר מת, לא יתעסקו בו, לא יהודים ולא ארמים, ולא ביום טוב ראשון ולא ביום טוב שני, לפי שאינם בני תורה, right? So, right, he brings this Gemara where it's talking about a certain town where they didn't allow to do certain things, because people don't know how to do things. They're not so expert in halacha, so we don't allow them to do these things. Because they're going to come to do, prohibitions, basically, right? So he says, but he says there's no source from that to prove anything. Because we said in the end of the Pek Rabbi Ishmael is where is this? Rabbi Chia Baraba Ikla Legavla Ve'asar Lehu Turmisin Deshak Legoim Be'achle Yisrael לפי שאינם בני תורה ואנו נוהגים להקל בכל נאכל כמות שהוא חי, או שאינו עולה על השולחן מלכים, ולא מחמינן לפי שאין לנו בני Torah, right? So, right, he also says there, right, in the Talmud, that we're not stringent about these things, In other words, we're not stringent that just because we're not expert in halacha, that we're going to come to do a sin. ועוד היה אומר רבנו תם, also he says, רבנו תם used to say, לפי שיש יהודים שמשתדלים לכתוב להם ולעשות כל צורכם, ואם יראו שיתעסקו לעשות מלאכה, לצורך המת, יחופו אותם לעשות מלאכה. So he says that, right, they're going to force them to do other labors if they see them doing labors, as we said, right? These thugs, right? לצורכם, ונהגו באשכנז שהגוי חופר הקבר. So he says the custom in Germany was like this, right? That the goy would dig the grave, ועושה ארון, right? He would make the casket, right? The tachrichin and the shrouds, the whole davar shehu isur deoraita, which whatever is in prohibition from the Torah. About tiltul be'otzat hamet, but he says when it comes to the rabbinical things like carrying the dead and so forth, right? Osei Israel, the Jews would do that. The mitoch shehutar otzat letzorach otar lemishlotzat, because it's allowed to do on Yom Tov, as we said, right? Okay, good. וזה לשון התרומת הדשן. Let's say תרומת דשן. כתב אשרי, right? It says in Asheri, דנהגו באשכנז ביום טוב שני שעושים נדיר גויים. So he brings this custom, right, in Germany, right, that we just said, that they used to do by way of goyim. Aseta kever, right, as we said, right, digging the grave, the aron, and the casket, and the shrouds, kol melachah sheni deraita, whatever is from the Torah. אבל כל מה שהוא רק ביסוד דרבנן, but whatever is only rabbinical, עושים על ידי ישראל, they will do by way of Jews. ונראה דהיינו בדית הגויים, it says that's only when they are goyim there, right? אבל אם לא אפשר, but if there's no goyim, על ידי goyim, right? כגון ביום ידם, for instance, let's say it's Sunday, right? The goyim don't like to work on Sunday, you know how it is, right? Okay, וכהי גבנה עושים הכל על ידי ישראל, so then we can do, it says everything by way of Jews, even in a place where the custom is to do by with goyim. ונראה אפילו ביום טוב של ראש השנה יש לעשות כן. So it says you can even do this on ראש השנה, it says. Okay. והריבש כתב, says the ריבש, בתשובה. לכן הטעם, האחר שהביא רבנו תם, משום שעושים מלאכת לשרים. So he brings this custom, the opinion of רבנו תם here, right? נכתוב להם בדמה לחברי, הנמי לטה דשני, לחברי שהיו כופין כל היהודים לעשות מלאכתם, ובפני יהודים שמועטים ונכנסים ברצונם לעבודת השרים, לא נחדל מקרוב מתנו. So look what he says, right? Interesting, Rivash, he says there was two different things, right? In the old days, as we said, right? These thugs used to force the Jews to do labor, but he says nowadays, just like there are some ministers, who take some of the people, and force them to do labor, not the whole community, So he says that's not the same thing, we're not going to refrain from burying the dead just because of that. Okay, interesting. מה שכתב רבנו לזה הסכים, right, ולזה הסכים אדוני הראש סל. So, right, then he brings, right, the two Paskins, right, that the Rosh Paskin like this last opinion, right, which is, right, lenient, I guess. Okay, we'll see. כך כתב בתשובה, זה תשובה, וזה נשור, רבנו תם עושה לעשות צורך אמת. So, says the Torah, right, says the Rosh, I'm sorry, the תשובה, that Rabbeinu Tam forbids, right, as we said, to do this, on the day Israel, by way of Jews, Yom Tov and Yom Tov, even on the second day of Yom Tov, but he says the custom is not like him. Oh, there you go, right? So the Rosh says we don't pass like Rabbeinu Tam. Oh. The Gamri pasak leatir. It says also the Ri was lenient, right? So there you go, right? Rabbeinu Tam is outnumbered. What can we do? Okay. Good. So we have a little more piece here. So it says, what about heating up the water, right? To bathe, to wash the dead body, corpse, right? So it says on second day of Yom Tov, for sure it's allowed. Because they made it like a Yom weekday, right? For this purpose. It says, even on first day of Yom Tov, we already wrote about B'Shem HaKolbo, name the Kolbo, the Sharet, it's allowed, even on the first day. Because we do allow heat water on Yom Tov, right? So therefore, it also trickles down to this. That's what he's saying. Okay, good. So we have one more piece in the Beit Yosef here. Let's see what the size is of this, right? Okay, it'll take like 5 minutes. If you guys want, we can finish it. So it says like this, right? Katav Rashba b'tshuva. He brings the tshuva of the Rashba here. Al echad sheba'u goyim ve'amu sheku listim, right? So what happened was, right, that there was one person, some Jew who claimed, right, that the goyim came, right, and he was beat up by some thugs, the derech rachok min ha'ir, right, far off from the town, right, keparsa v'chatzi v'nishtapek ha'shoel im nimtza'u met im mutar le'avio le'ir. Right, so the question was like this, right? So in other words, what happened was like this, right? That this Jew was attacked by some thugs, and killed, murdered. He was murdered, basically, right? So the question is, are we allowed to bring him and bury him, right? Are we allowed to bring him to the town and bury him? So it's like outside the town, that's the thing. So, okay, that's the question. Or the other choice is, right, they should just bury him in his place right there. In other words, wherever he died, right? Maybe they should bury him there. So he answers, right, the Rashba, better to bring him to the town and to bury him in a Jewish cemetery. Interesting. So all the more so if he has like, some kind of, like a burial plot, right, for his family, family plot. Right, the Yom Tov Sheni says, because the second day of Yom Tov, the rabbis made like a weekday, right, regarding the burial. But as we said, right, even to make the shrouds and the coffin, he said, also to all the more so, he says, to bury him in a Jewish cemetery. This is all the more so if it's as we said, like a family plot, right? So he says this was the ordinance of the forefathers, right? And the rabbis, big rabbis. So it happens all the time. He says, so he says, we're not really, right, particular about the issue of boundaries, right, when it comes to second day of Yom Tov for a dead body. We're not particular, he says. That's a custom, he says. So therefore, he says, we bring him right from one town, where there's no Jewish cemetery there. So we bring him to a Jewish cemetery, a different town. Right? So says Beit Yosef, right? This is not like this rabbi, Agot Asheri, who seems to argue with this. He writes over there in Mod Katan, so he says there was actually a real case in France, right? They brought like a dead body, right, on the second day of Yom Tov, the Kovro El Irachet, it's buried in a different town. The Kas Alem Rabbeinu Tam. So Rabbeinu Tam was angry at them, right? So we see, right, Rabbeinu Tam was angry already second time. A different story over here. Okay, so Rabbeinu Tam, was a little bit stringent about these things, right? We see, right? Okay. He says even though in that town where he died, there was no Jewish cemetery there. But Rabbeinu Tam didn't want them to bring the body, right, for burial on the second day of Yom Tov. As we said, right, he was stringent about this, So he says, right, they should have buried him over there where he died, in that town, right? And then they should have, moved him afterwards, right, into the permanent grave. Right, to bring him to a different town. But Rabbeinu Simcha, right, to expropriate his body, right? What they say, right? Okay, so Rabbeinu Simcha katav de'im libu tzrichim kapara. So he says that this rabbi that if they accompany the dead, like that in that case, they need atonement for that, right? In other words, they did a sin. Then it says you should not bring him from downtown to another, right? The dead body, where there's graves over there. He says that's Israel. But what about bringing him from, right, the diaspora to Israel? Right? Are you allowed to do that? So he said that we can do. He says. So it seems like there's a mitzvah, to bury him in Eretz Israel. So therefore, that he allows. Interesting. Okay. So, right, we see again, right, the same pattern here. The Rabbeinu Tam is stringent about these things, but it seems like we don't pass it like it. So it seems like we're going to go like the Rashba here, who does allow to move, right, the dead from one town to another in order they should go into a Jewish cemetery or a family plot, whatever, right? All these kinds of things. Okay, interesting. Now what you said, right? You shouldn't move the dead from the town where there's graves. So it says, so that's even talking about weekdays, right? Because if it was Yom Tov, even if we're talking about a town which there is no graves there, they hold that they should not do that. So now we pass into halakha, right? Beit Yosef, right? Bottom line, right? What's halakha? Kedivya Rashba. It says to be passing like the Rashba, right? Surprise, surprise. I told you, right? We pass like the Rashba, who's lenient about this. So he says, why? Because he says his words make sense. They're logical. Right? The logic is compelling. So it's not any worse than making right some shrouds for him. Says also another thing. Look what it says, right? Because Rashba was Rab Muvhak, right? What does that mean, Rab Muvhak? Anybody know what that means? What does the word muvhak mean in Hebrew? So what that means is, right, he's an expert man in halakha, right? A true expert in halakha. Muvhak, right? So don't mess with him. Can't mess with people like that. The Rashba is very respected in halakha. Big time. And the old she'eid al-sim Masim, right? And he says, right, that's a custom, so there you go, right? When you have a custom, you don't have to be worried about it. Right? It says Rokach, Basiman Shinchet, Shemutar Liskor Sfina Beyom Tov Sheni, Leolicha Met Mekom Lokom. So he says, right, this rabbi, that you can even hire a boat, to move the body from one town to another, to do by way of a boat. Interesting. Okay. Because we hold, right, the Jews can do it on second day of Yom Tov. Right, even though it won't be delayed. All the more so, right? Even all the more so, he says in this case, where if they don't hire this boat, right, it definitely will be held up, for quite a while, and this way the body will, right, decompose. It'll be a problem. So there you go, right? Beautiful, nice here. Nice words of Torah, right? From big rabbis, big people. Okay, so let's go Shulchan Aruch and we're done. I won't keep you all night. All right, here we go. So it says Shulchan Aruch, Yom Tov Sheni Tasku Bo Yisrael, right? When it comes second day of Yom Tov, the Jews can do everything, right? As we said, right? People Yom Sheni Shel Rosh Hashanah, even if it's Rosh Hashanah. Right? Even though it's not going to wait too long, right? You're allowed to even, right, bring some myrtle branches, right, from the ground, cut them down. Right? Also to make the shrouds, make a casket, and also to dig the grave, right? Everything, the whole thing, right? The whole job. Also to heat up the water, and to cut the hair, right? Trim the hair, the whole thing. So it says if in that town they don't have a Jewish cemetery, right, so we can move him to a different town. Right, which has a Jewish cemetery there. Right, even if it's outside the boundaries. Also, as we said, right, we can hire a boat to carry the body, right? So I guess we can take him on the plane also, right? El Al, right? We can take El Al, fly him over Delta, right? But Delta now is not flying anymore to Israel, right? They stopped. Okay, for a few days anyway. We'll see what happens, right? United Delta, they stopped flying to Israel. They're afraid of the war, Okay. All right. So right. So now the only choice you have is El Al if you want to go to Israel. Sorry. The Yom Tov Shani L'Gabe Emet. So it says because second day of Yom Tov regarding a dead, right? Kachol shall be a Ravana. The rabbis make it like weekday. People have Shabbat Amin. Even if it's possible to do by way of goyim, the Jews should do it anyway. Haga aval beAshkenaz u'medinot elu en noagim ken. But he says, right, the Rama. So he says, but in Ashkenaz, right, in other words, in Germany and Europe, right, Eastern Europe, he says the custom is not like that. So it seems like what? That they're stringent like Rabbeinu Tam. Let's see. So the custom is like this, he says, right? Not exactly Rabbeinu Tam. He says, whenever it's possible to do by way of goyim, we do by way of goyim, if it's possible. Right? And the Jews can do all the rabbinical things. Right? So we saw this opinion in the Beit Yosef, right? Somebody brought this down. About im lo efshar, but it says if it's not possible, right? By way of with goyim, mutar asot chakol yedei Yisrael. So then the Jews can do everything, he says. So not exactly Rabbeinu Tam. So who is this? Trumat Hadeshen, right? He was the one who passed like this. There you go. That seems to be the custom of the Ashkenazim. Chutz mina kippah shebonim ala kever, right? So he says, but don't do the canopy, on top, right? You can live without a canopy, right? On Yom Tov, what's the big deal, right? Kever. We don't do that in Yom Tov, right? Building a canopy, some kind of a structure over the grave. Right? So says Rama, but he brings that what we said in Beit Yosef, the Rama, that you're allowed to, put some dirt, right? Pile up some dirt there, make a little mound. By the way, why do they do that? Why do they pile up dirt on top of the grave? Anybody know why they do that?
Isn't this the culmination of the burial? Isn't that what you said?
Yeah, but what's the reason why they do that, right? So the answer is because, they want to mark the grave, right? So everybody should know that it's buried there. Because otherwise, like nobody knows what's going on, like they're not putting the tombstone, you know what I mean? But they're marking it by way of, making a mound. That's the reason why they do it. They do it today also, by the way. It's done also today. I've seen this many times. So he goes on, right? So says Shulchan Aruch, that's only if they want to bury him that day, though, on Yom Tov. If they don't want to bury him on that day, right? So then they shouldn't do anything, right? They shouldn't do any labor. That's what we said, right? We shouldn't even do by way of going, he says, right? But it says the only thing you can do is carry the dead body, right? That you can do. Okay, very good. So, very nice. So he brings in parentheses, Bekin Kriyat Shema Tefillah, im met lo met, b'yom tov rishon, o sheni, ayin le'el siman amud ayin aleph, sif bet, u'lekaman siman tavkuf memchet, b'sif hey, right? So, it brings the parentheses over here. If you want to see the laws of Kriyat Shema and prayers, right? When a person dies on Yom Tov, what do you do? Look over there in these chapters. Okay, very good. So, B'ez Hashem, thanks for coming. Chodesh Tov. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. We'll see you tomorrow. Chazak Baruch. And pray, for Israel. Now we have some tension going on there, So visit Hashem. Everything should turn out good. All right. So we'll see you tomorrow. Chazak Baruch. Laila Tov.
Kavod Tov. Thank you so much.
God bless. All the best.
Thank you, Rabbi.